Starting the recording now, and again I'm extremely pleased to introduce my colleague Jason Stevens. He's back in New Zealand and the University of Auckland, and Jason, take it away with our question and answer webinar.
Thank you, David, and thank you all for joining me what is early Tuesday morning in Auckland, and I guess a mid-afternoon for you there on a Monday. Glad David is with us despite being having quite an early summer cold there, so I hope he gets better soon. Yeah, so this is our sixth and really final training webinar, as it were, and it's really designed to be mostly a Q&A session to address any lingering questions, comments, thoughts, and so forth before we head into the summer, and which I think we're all looking forward to. So without further ado, let us begin, if I can. Yeah, there we go. Okay, well, as always, we're going to do a really quick review of what our objectives are for today, but also then a quick review of the content of the last session we had, which is really the pulling it all together session. And just a really quick review, as I said, about the four components from awareness to action, and an example of how they look in action. And then we'll give you a quick little preview of the fall schedule, and some key dates there, and the goals with those dates. And then we'll open it up for the last 20 or so minutes to address any questions that you might have. And then we'll bring this webinar to a close. So without further ado, the objectives, again, we're going to review the application of the FCM to an ethical dilemma with a focus on academic integrity, and in doing so, hoping to increase your understanding of how you yourself might promote this development and use of the FCM in your classroom. We want to reply to your questions, and I suppose I should have reminded you of the fall schedule and goals. I'm actually going to flip the order on those last two. But the overall goal here is to, as we end this webinar and you head into the summer, to hopefully get you continuing to, if not develop, refine the lesson plans that you've already submitted, so that come August, early September, you're ready to go. So let's go ahead and take a review. So these are some slides that we showed you our last meeting here, in particular trying to pull it all together into one little one slide, and focusing on those four questions that we focused on throughout this training, and kind of what the ideal sort of responses would look like. So in this sense, we little scenario here of a friend seeking test questions and during lunch for an exam that he has the next hour, and what that might look like from an awareness, let's see here, desired response from awareness perspective would be recognizing that there are in fact moral or ethical issues being raised here, fairness, loyalty, authority, and such, that when asking themselves is what's the right thing to do, what one should do, it would be not to share those test questions because of issues of fairness with respect to other students, and perhaps violating the trust of teachers that count on students not to share such questions and test questions and answers. And then this question about commitment, and is one personally responsible for acting on that judgment, and getting students to make the commitment not to share that because of issues of fairness, and not to rationalize away their responsibility because of a friend is involved. And then finally, not sharing the test questions, and but hopefully offering maybe some other kind of help that would be appropriate and ethical, such as helping a friend to study during that lunch period rather than just outright giving them answers. So this is just an example, of course. A lot of times these dilemmas are going to be much more rich, interesting, and perhaps even complex in the little scenario scripted there. we've shared with you a lot of different academic integrity cases, some real coming out of the headlines of the last couple of years involving even scholars in the domain, as well as real cases involving high school kids often, or university students such as at Stuyvesant there in New York, and Harvard students in Boston, and the like. And of course some of the hypothetical dilemmas we developed. We ask you to choose what's sort of most appropriate for your class or your subject area, and use those dilemmas. As we also reviewed last week, those 4 big questions, of course, are have 4 big goals of raising awareness, honing judgment, strengthening commitment, and ensuring action. And those goals are designed to be met by use of the activity protocols that we've created. So the AMAP, EDMA, VIPA, and SWAP, respectively, for those 4 goals. I think David, in the context of, in the course of meeting with you guys face to face and or over Skype, individual team meetings, I think there, at a couple of places there might have been concerns raised about this language of using, AMAP, EDMA, VIPA, and SWAP. Just to be clear, we've named them those things, or they're just really acronyms or abbreviations for the protocols. You do not have to use that language, though. You don't. The protocols themselves, say the analysis of a moral awareness protocol or the ethical decision-making activity. The goal is not in any way for you to use these acronyms and get students to remember these acronyms. Those are just names or labels for these things. So we don't care if kids talk about, use the word AMAP or even know what it stands for. The main thing is focusing on the process. And the process, in the case of the AMAP, is raising awareness and those process steps to do so. So just so we're clear about that. If the acronyms help you or help students, then great. But that's not the end game, as it were. I also want to say I recognize this is complex, but I hope it's not complicated. There's a fine distinction there, I suppose, but moral functioning, ethical functioning is complex. That is to say, there's a lot of things going on. There's multiple components going on and interacting with each other. And as we move from recognizing that we're in a moral situation to carrying out some kind of action in that situation, that is a complex phenomenon. I mean, morality, ethics is a complex domain of human behavior. However, we're hoping it's not complicated. By that I mean, we've really laid out, we've got the 4 components, and we've laid out the protocols that go with them and spelled out our objectives. So even though it's complex, it's not complicated in a confusing sense. If you do feel you're still confused, then definitely follow up with us. But the goal here is to appreciate the complexity without being complicated or being confused by it and making it complicated. So I hope that's clear. Let's move on and see what's next. I guess I started to fill this out a little bit. So this is what we've provided you with are really 2 sets of resources, or really 3. All of the PowerPoints that we've delivered, which have some content in them, the protocols that we just went through, and the AMAP and all that, but also, of course, learning templates to help you, design how you're going to and plan how you're going to use those templates. In this slide, I just sort of made a little bit more of a synthesis slide and said, this is what's kind of common or part of all of these. If you look across the 4 templates that we've shared with you, the required setting and materials is always, the setting is getting kids into a situation where they can easily meet in small groups to discuss, because of all of the activity protocols have a small group discussion component. But of course, there is going to be whole group learning and discussion as well. So you want it set up in a way that, of course, they can orient themselves to you when you're presenting material. And that presenting material requires, of course, maybe a PowerPoint and projector, unless you're going to just make handouts of them and you have some other means at which you display and share information. And then finally, of course, for materials, the activity protocols themselves. Oftentimes we say making 2 copies of them, so depending on the activity. And in terms of goals and objectives, really we have the 4 big ones. So that during the first week, the first lesson, it's going to be focused on that raising awareness of what's moral. The second, increasing the use of principled reasoning and making judgments, and so on. So those are the 4 distinct goals or objectives over the course of the 4-unit lesson. And then finally, for activities, the primary one we want you using here is because of all of these lead with a question, right? What's moral? What's right? Am I responsible? It's really meant to be inquiry-based discussions where students are, in small groups talking about these questions and the ideas that you present to them through the PowerPoint. But also, there's those activity protocols themselves, there's room for, and often starts with a little bit of individual reflection where there's steps involved where the individual is thinking for him or herself about these questions and what they might do. But also direct instruction, where you're providing some content for them to think about either individually or in the group inquiry-based discussion. So that direct instruction, right, going back to the awareness component, that's using Haidt's intuitive ethics, the 5 intuitive ethics. When it comes to component 2 and making moral judgments, it's thinking about the distinction between personal level reasoning versus social conventional reasoning versus morally principled reasoning. And then in the case of the third activity, it's providing some direct instruction on rationalizations, for example, those mechanisms of moral disengagement we talked about so students can think about those and be aware of those. And then finally, developing skills and will. Depending on what you're teaching, you might focus on skills for avoiding plagiarism or for better preparing oneself for a test and so on and so forth. And the will always included components of staying the course and providing them with responses as needed when the temptation to cheat comes into play. And finally, with assessment, there'll be a lot of you just doing informal checks as you do as a teacher to make sure students are on task and following along. But in terms of formal assessments, really it's the protocols themselves, I suppose, when students are filling those out and going through, and that's really capturing a sense of where they're at and will allow you as a teacher or even us as researchers to see if students' thinking has evolved over time. From the time that they did a practice protocol or an AMAP, for instance, to more of a post-activity one. So, okay, with that said, let's move forward. Moving really slow on me. So, okay, so as you know, everything is online, including all of the webinars and templates, some of the lesson plans that you've developed and submitted and worked through with David. And then there are additional resources on C's website as well for those that want to go further and look at some other stuff. Now let's turn to our timeline before we open this up. So we're finishing up this webinar, and we'll look to hopefully have all of your lesson templates, your adaptations of the lesson templates. Again, this is not a massive task. It shouldn't be anyway. It's simply the templates are pretty well complete. It's just a matter of you contextualizing it a little bit, if you will, identifying the subject area and any other things that you might need to include to make for a clear lesson template for you to use come fall. Our hope is, yeah, that you can practice these with each other and have at least one filming session, which would help both you and us assess, where you're at and offer suggestions for going forward. And in terms of the baseline assessment we want to do with students, we've talked about that. That involves probably about a 20-minute, I'd say 20-25 minutes on the computer, a survey monkey, so online administered, baseline assessment that will kick off after the new academic year begins in August or early September, and that is actually on the next line here. Then, so I think among the schools are starting at different times, but most of you are starting, I think, in that last week of August. Some not till after Labor Day rather. So we're thinking about running 2 sessions to accommodate probably some scheduling differences there. And this is, really just a way for us to get back together as a small community and talk a little bit about, by then everybody will have their lessons in, and David and I will have gone through them, and just hopefully build some excitement and solidarity as we get ready to as you guys get ready to teach the lessons that you've developed. So please reply to David with which one of those 2 dates is going to work for you. Around the same time, once we'll be working with you to figure out what's the best time for you to get students online and complete that 20 to 25 minute baseline assessment. And then the big chunk here, or the important thing, is actually presenting your set of lessons in one class, and to do so, preferably within a 3-week period. So that way there's some kind of confined time period and continuity with respect to running through the series of lessons. Some of you might do it in 4 or 5 straight classes, and have it done in a week or a little bit more. But at most, we'd like to see the set get taught within a 3-week period. And so that we're done by early mid-October. Now, part of the main purpose of this grant is showing that that this series of webinars was effective, and that in fact you guys go and are able to use the activity protocols and teach the content we've provided with a reasonable degree of fidelity, as it's called, fidelity to implementation. And so that then requires some observations so that we can assess how well that's going. And David and I have talked about this. In an ideal world, we'd be there in person, and also getting some good videotape of it. Given that David's working by himself up there and I'm down in Auckland, it might, and you guys are spread out a fair amount. We've got 15, 16 teachers involved. It may be the case that we'll need to use or have you guys video yourselves. That could be as simple as something as using an iPad, which has a pretty good camera on it, in order to set it up in one place and have you that includes you and maybe some of the class, and it's as simple as that. If you have a good media department in your high school and kids involved in that, and maybe that somebody could come in and actually do some taping for you, whether it was a student or or some other sort of support staff. So again, work with David on figuring out what's going to be the most efficient and effective way for getting some observations done or filming of teaching, so we can use that as data for ourselves. Okay. Finally, we want to schedule. We just sort of talked about this last night. We didn't have this in the original plan, but I thought it would be good if say on that Monday, October 28th, everybody will have been done teaching their thing. If we do a final webinar, just to share your experiences. We do, as part of the research element of this, want to know kind of what went really well and what didn't go so well. Sometimes when I work with students, we call those pluses and deltas. The pluses are the things that went really well, and the deltas are the things that we would change. Things that you think that could be improved in some way or another. Whether that's with respect to your own teaching of this, or looking back even and saying, I've now taught this and I now realize kind of what you guys, David and Jason, could have done better in order to prepare me to do this. So, it could be very specific stuff or it could be very small stuff, but the idea is to, pull it together and have some kind of feedback from you on how it went, what went well, and what would need to change to make it better. And that's also going to be part of your, a survey that, that we'll have you fill out online as well. So this final item of supporting teacher and student post-unit assessment, it both includes an online survey for you as an individual, as well as, of course, for your students. And we're hoping that's going to wrap up in, November, December. So that is the major timeline. Did I miss anything there, David, before we turn to questions and answers?
No, very clear. Yeah, I'm good.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes. Did you hear my reply? I was good, and I've solicited in our chat box a request for questions now, and I haven't gotten any responses yet, but here's some prompts that Jason has put up about possible questions you might have. So maybe I'm going to ask that that folks just chat in the chat box and just say we have no questions, or we're good. Or if you have something, but use that chat box to give us an indication about how comfortable you're feeling about how we're wrapping up this school year.
Well, while people do that, I'll just maybe continue to chat a little bit. I think one of the bigger things, we talked about it last week, what I'd like to know, maybe I'll put a more specific question, is do you have a vision for how this is going to, work in your classroom? Like, I think it's that initial launch, right? How do I get into this? Because this is not something that you've probably really done before, right? Maybe you've talked about plagiarism and told students that cheating is against the school policies or whatever, but you obviously haven't tried to carry out a set of dialogues like these. But I hope my suggestion the last time we met to think about your discipline. So whether it's science or social studies or English literature, there's professional associations there that usually have ethical codes of conduct, and I've provided examples in that last webinar we had. And I think that, and as well as a set of questions of what it means to achieve with integrity in your specific field or domain, and using that as a gateway to these lessons, to engaging students in these set of lessons, to think about their own responsibilities ultimately, about behaving ethically as science students, really I like to think of it as students doing science, as students doing history, students doing English or literature, So I think if you think of your teaching, or part of the way you teach is putting students in those roles, then I think that's an excellent gateway. Let's see. So questions while I was blathering on here. We don't need videos for all of the lessons. I'm looking at Regina's question. The main thing, we just wanted, preferably 2, I guess, of the 5, I suppose it would be if you have the wrap-up lesson. 2 of the 5, just as some data for us to code. Essentially what David and I are going to do is we're going to have a coding sheet that's going to look at, so for example, let's say, Regina, that David comes in and observes you teaching your first lesson, and it involves the use of raising moral awareness. And so what our coding sheet would look like is, well, it'll have 2 sort of dimensions. One will be content. To what extent did Regina actually teach the content associated with raising moral awareness? Now that content is the 5 ethics of Jonathan Haidt, right, or the intuitive ethics. So did you at some point in your 20, 30-minute lesson, whatever it was, present clearly, Haidt's model defining what morality is in the first place. And then the second sort of set for our code would be, to what extent did you use the AMAP? Now that's the activity protocol associated, of course, with that first lesson. So did you use it? You can say yes, it's an easy yes or no question, but the scale likely, we haven't really fully developed these fidelity of implementation measures, but it'll be like, did you use it as prescribed? So it's not just did you use it and engage students in all of the process steps, including the ones that involve, I think, some individual reflection as well as getting into the group and so forth. So basically, that's what we're looking to do, is to have lessons of a couple of, not all 5, but just 2 of them for each of you that give us an opportunity to essentially, code or assess what you've done, at least in terms of those 2 dimensions. That is the content. Did you teach what we prescribed, and did you? And then second, more the process. Did you engage students and use the activity protocol and engage them in the process steps that were prescribed? So we're not assessing, really much more than that. This is about really, did you use the content of this program and the protocols / procedures that it prescribes, AMAP, EDMA, so on and so forth. We're not really looking at much more than that at this point. David?
Well, and I wanted to clarify also, because Regina, there's actually 2 parts, whether you implied it or not, there's 2 parts to the question. We have asked that you digitally record one of your lessons to your colleagues this spring. And what's the point of that? We wanted you to have dialogue with your colleagues, and we thought that the digital recording of one of your lessons would help just within your team, create that dialogue, your own observations, and things like that. And then to share that with us through YouTube, it would just allow us to have some comment about how the lessons are being developed to further your preparation for next fall. And now what Jason's directly responded to are the observations for next fall, which we've suggested. We may be using digital recording, but if we can't get to 2 of your lessons, we may be asking if there's any support at your school through your IDT department, through some volunteer student corps, through one of your colleagues, to digitally record one of the lessons. So again, as Jason said, we could be scoring fidelity to the lesson. So 2 parts to it. One lesson we have asked for this spring, and that's not just necessarily to students. That's probably just to your colleagues, and you guys get together as a team. Each of you do one lesson and record it, and have the discussion associated with that, and post that on YouTube for us, for our own discussion with you. And then next fall, the observations will likely be digitally recorded, and if I can't get to 2 lessons, we might be seeking some support from the school. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but we're just giving you a heads up that might be an ask.
Yeah. The main thing, too, that why we're recording these is, and asking you to do it for the practice one, is just to get comfortable with it, and get comfortable with sharing your teaching and what you're doing. I think as teachers, I know that we kind of go to our own room and we don't usually share our teaching necessarily with others. That's variations in different schools in terms of that, but this is an experiment. We're experimenting here, and so to be able to get comfortable with sharing and not worrying about, I think, is part of the goal of having you do it within a team. But in terms of recording the actual observations of the lessons, the reason for that is that generally speaking, what our funders want to see is that not only that one person went and observed it, but if we have a tape of it, then I can score it too, even though I'm not there, and then we can establish something that's called inter-rater reliability. So 2 people looking at the same thing basically give it roughly the same scores. That way you're not relying on the judgment of one person. So it's a little more scientific, in other words. If we have a videotape of it, then we can go back to it, and people can look at it and use the scoring protocol that we've developed and ideally get the same score. So that's just a matter of kind of good research. If David and I could both be there and attending all of your lessons, we wouldn't necessarily need to record it per se. But it still would be advisable. In any event, follow up with that if that's all not clear. There were some other questions that came up here. So we got Regina's.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, no, Adair asked about how long the survey will take on Suva. About 20-25 minutes. As you'll recall, all of you took a SurveyMonkey. It'll be a little bit different, but it'll be very much like that. Remember the SurveyMonkey survey I had you guys take? That it gave you a little bit of scenarios and asked you to do some of the stuff essentially at the using the 4 components. So it's going to be equivalent to that, 20-25 minutes. Yes, the best way to do that is to reserve a computer room if you can, and to get students in there to do it all at the same time. David and I, do this kind of work on a consulting basis for schools, and that's typically the best procedure. Is booking the computer room, and for the 20-30 minutes it's needed, and getting it done that way.
Our colleagues from West Hill said they were good and didn't have any questions. So Jay, we thanks for typing in that you were fine. On reflection or any other things that come up, any last questions, folks? I'm going to unmute everybody now just to see if we can avoid the feedback. So everybody's actually unmuted now. So Jay, you guys are good?
We're good, thank you. We're just talking about, the logistics of it. We're going to try to do it next Monday.
Terrific, thank you. And Regina, Adair, you guys feeling comfortable?
Yeah, all set, thank you.
Now we'll have to talk to Mark about getting together.
Mm-hmm.
And have you guys been able to get on the blog through home access?
I haven't tried it at home. I've done it through school.
But you're good with that. But Adair and Regina, you guys have had issues because of the school blocking. Have you been able to log on from home?
I haven't tried. I've just been getting on the stuff that you emailed us.
Janelka, please come to the main office.
Yep, same thing with me.
Okay, yeah, I'd encourage you to try from home just to let me know if it works for you, because that's where you're going to be able to see everybody else's lessons.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, very good. Jason's got the last slide up here, recognizing that this August 26th or September 9th will be our kickoff webinar, so we'd like your feedback on that. Again, if you anticipate, speak as a team, maybe find out from your administration if there's any protocol that needs to be completed prior to the fall for us to be able to run these student surveys. And this, we're just going to be surveying the one class that you're going to be piloting your lessons in. That we'd want to make sure we take care of any paperwork so that folks don't throw us a protocol issue in the fall that takes 30 or 60 days to complete. Sometimes schools say, oh, you got to go to our school board to get these things completed. Then yeah, we'd want to be doing that over the summer, right? So appreciate any heads up about that. Well, very good. Jason, thank you so much again for your collaboration.
Thank you, and everyone else there. Looking forward to having a great summer and reconvening with you at the end of it.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now and then look forward again to your lessons continuing to be sent to me, and hopefully we'll have all these published by the end of the month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.